Welcome to Hudson Institute's South Asia Center's Expert Series for Part 3 of the interview with Mr. Gordon Chang. Mr. Chang is the co-host of The John Batchelor Show. He's authored books on China and its neighbors. He contributes regularly to Forbes.com, The Daily Beast, and the World Affairs Journal. Mr. Chang has also appeared on Fox News, BBC, and CNN, as well as The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. In this part, we discuss China's foreign policy through the lens of the One Belt, One Road initiative and its activity in Central Asia.
Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, wants to connect China to Africa and to Europe. And the land road is going to be through Central Asia and the sea route through the Indian Ocean. And he not only wants to sell stuff to others, but he also wants to dominate those areas. And the real problem, there are two real problems here. One of them is, of course, Central Asia is not necessarily stable. Indian Ocean is not necessarily friendly to Chinese vessels because you have India there that is irked by seeing the Chinese patrol just off their shores. But there's a bigger issue here, and that is essentially if this infrastructure were viable in the first place, it would have already been built. So what we're seeing here is the building of infrastructure that serves political, strategic purposes, not necessarily economic purposes. And we got to remember that, China's economy might not be able to sustain this. So for instance, last year, two-way trade for China declined by 8.0%. That's against the target of an increase of 6.0. So far this year, both imports and exports are down by big amounts. And essentially, this really means that China has got to sort of tune up its economy in order to support One Belt, One Road. This is $1 trillion of infrastructure that they're contemplating for the Belt and the Road. And that means they've got to build up their economy to be able to support that. Now, of course they can build it now, and they just completed a rail link to Afghanistan. But whether they can send more than just the trains this year is a big issue, especially as the Chinese economy faces some really important challenges, such as the buildup of debt. So One Belt, One Road is working now. It's probably not building out as fast as people expected. I suspect, though, in the future, there's going to be even more problems, and the problems really are centralized in the Chinese economy. China has, of course, a 5-year plan, but the One Belt, One Road is certainly more than a 5-year proposition. It's going to take them more than a decade to build this out, especially with the very slow start. We're now 3 years into it, and China is a lot behind where people thought it would be when Xi Jinping started to announce this in September of 2013. They're going to face problems, especially as the global economy doesn't cooperate. We're seeing sort of a very stagnant global economy right now. Could obviously get worse, especially when China has its crisis, as it will. China can postpone this crisis, as it has. But it can't postpone it indefinitely. So at some point, there's going to be this adjustment in the Chinese economy. They aren't going to be able to sell as much. They're not going to be able to buy as much. And so I think that this is a nice idea, but I think eventually we're going to see that this is not going to work. Well, clearly Beijing has rejected the July 12th Arbitral Award, and it's not going to accept it anytime soon. That award was sweeping. It was a complete rejection of Beijing's sea claims, and so we're not going to see China accept it. Right now, China's reaction has been partly military. We are seeing these pictures of their long-range bombers over Scarborough Shoal, which is contested. And China's starting regular combat air patrols over the South China Sea. So this is extremely dangerous. The big flashpoint is Scarborough Shoal, which is 124 nautical miles to the main Philippine island of Luzon. It guards the strategic Manila and Subic bays. And recently, the Philippines has released pictures showing barges and other vessels around Scarborough. China seized it in early 2012, and it looks like it's going to make permanent its act of aggression if it starts cementing over coral there. I don't think that the United States, the Philippines, the international community can allow this to happen because this, I think, would drive the region inevitably to conflict. You remember, in early 2012, Washington brokered an agreement between Beijing and Manila where both sides would withdraw their craft to sort of diffuse a confrontation. But only the Philippines complied, and so China effectively seized the shoal. Washington didn't do anything to enforce the agreement it put together, and that, thinking in this town was that, this is going to diffuse a confrontation. Well, that only emboldened and strengthened the worst elements and the most belligerent elements in the Chinese political system because they won without fighting. And so what did they do? They didn't tamp down confrontation. They just made it larger by creating another confrontation at Second Thomas Shoal, also thought to be Philippine territory, as well as in the East China Sea in the Senkakus. So, essentially, there is a problem here. China is moving forward. It's not seeing resistance. And essentially what the United States needs to do is to stop this. Now, the Financial Times has reported that in March of this year, President Obama had a conversation with Xi Jinping where he told the Chinese that there would be serious consequences if they started to reclaim Scarborough. I think that President Obama repeated that warning at the G20 because if you read the White House readout of his meeting with Xi Jinping, President Obama repeated America's commitment to defend its treaty allies, which includes the Philippines. So this is going to be an issue, because if the United States can't stop reclamation at Scarborough, it means we can no longer deter China. And a China that cannot be deterred will lead the region probably to some sort of conflict. The route through Central Asia is really difficult. In some of these countries, there's instability. Best example of that is the Pakistan Economic Corridor. Part of that goes through Baluchistan. And on August 15th, Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, reached out to the Baluchs. And that was a sign. Basically, Modi was saying to Pakistan, if you get involved in Kashmir and make things worse there for us, we're going to make things really bad for you in Baluchistan. So this is something where, China's, $46 billion or so in investment could actually end up producing very little of benefit to China because people along that route can actually shut it down. This is going to be a very difficult challenge for China. We've already had Chinese casualties around the Gwadar port. And clearly, if India decides to fuel that insurgency, it'll get much worse for China, making their investment unviable. There's similar problems elsewhere along the route in Central Asia, but the one right now that we should focus on is the one in Pakistan, because India is thinking big. It has decided to retaliate for what it perceives as Pakistani problems. And this could get really ugly very fast when you have these two countries go at each other. And China could end up being, in a sense, the third-party victim. And that really means that the land route that China is contemplating can be interdicted. A lot of people say, Xi Jinping is China's most powerful leader since Deng Xiaoping or even Mao Zedong. I don't believe it. I don't believe that he's consolidated control. And the reason is there have been so many purges. Now, purges show that he can actually get rid of people, but it also shows that the situation in China is fluid, because if things were stable, why would there need to be more purges? So he's facing a lot of domestic opposition. He is behind One Belt, One Road. This is his project, which means that people who oppose Xi Jinping oppose One Belt, One Road, or could potentially do so. And that's one of the reasons why I think we've seen less progress in the last 3 years than people expected. It's largely because there is domestic opposition in China to this grand project. It's very hard for us on the outside to know what's going on inside Chinese political circles, but nonetheless, this could be a casualty of the infighting among senior civilians. Most people think China is stable, and it has generally been stable for quite some time, but we're starting to see signs of stress at the top of the political system. And when civilians have been fighting with each other, it means that the Chinese military has become more influential in policy circles. I think that they're actually driving foreign policy in certain areas with little civilian oversight. That's why China, I think, has become much more belligerent in recent years. This is not a good story. There's no coherence right now in Beijing. We see too many signs of stress. So this can change everything. Problems in the Chinese political system will affect the Chinese economy, and vice versa, of course. China's external policies are driving countries away from Beijing. That's not good for a Chinese economy that does need markets. You put this all together, we don't know, of course, how this is going to work out, but it seems to me that things are going in the wrong direction for China, which means they're going to go in the wrong direction for countries in the region.